All
The
right.
problem
Well,
with
it's
these automatic
6:05.
translators is that they tend to try to be direct translations. For example, you just said, "Well, go ahead and get started." That expression doesn't translate into another language. You could say, "We will go ahead and start," but to get started, they don't get that. So in other words, they don't use that name. So if they start putting in to get, then the Spanish turns out to be garbled because it makes no sense. That idiom makes no sense in Spanish.
Interesting. Well,
That'll always be the problem with these automatic translators unless they really put every idiomatic expression in, then I guess maybe there will be artificial intelligence someday that can do all that.
yeah, we've come a long ways in 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic, but it's still not perfect. So,
Yeah. You can just have an expression like "I'll be right back" and try to change that literally into another language. It will make no sense at all. But if you are an English speaker, you know what that means. It means you will return quickly.
yeah,
And,
exactly.
but if you say "return quickly," the translator will pick that up. So anyway, it'll be fun to watch.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? It looks like we got a lot of folks on. So, um, good evening, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. So we'll start again with some updates. We got Mayor Pro Tem West here, so I'll turn it over to him in just a second. We've got some a few focus areas to wrap up, and then before that, this agenda is actually a little backwards. We'll talk about the public meetings and the next steps first, instead of trying to throw that all the way at the end. Um, so with that, I'll go ahead and just turn it over to Councilmember West and let him have the floor.
Thanks, Daniel. And again, thank you to everybody who's on the task force, who's been putting in the work for, I mean, it's been over a year now, I feel like, at least, and for staff for doing the heavy lifting here. So just before I kind of get into what I wanted to tell you guys, one really positive thing that's come out of this is we identified out of the streets and alleys and sidewalks that y'all have recommended for fixes. I can confirm that 11 of the sidewalks were not in the needs inventory, and they are now in the needs inventory for the next bond. I don't have the number of streets and alleys, but I'll have that for you, and Daniel can push that out in a future email. But I guarantee you there's going to be streets and alleys that you've asked for reconstruction or resurfacing that were not in the needs inventory already. And so your work here is very valuable for your neighbors, just to, at a minimum, just to get that all in the needs inventory. Also, anything that I've kind of been watching and see as a no-brainer that seems like everybody supports. Yeah, if it's an infrastructure type thing, I'm just pushing that up to staff right now, such as looking for a pocket park along Hampton Road. That seemed to be pretty popular in the discussion when you guys were talking about that. And so we've already alerted park staff to be, prospecting for small parks. So for the Sunset Hill, Hollywood Hill area, to find a small park that could fit into that area because it's lacking parks, frankly. And then also there seemed to be some interest in doing some type of a small plaza right at Hampton and Clarendon, and Public Works Department's looking into that already. So your work is already like generating some positive, I guess, momentum with city staff from your efforts. So thank you with that. So the next step tonight, as I understand it, is for y'all to power through what's left that you haven't already covered. And it will, because you've got the community and you've got the public meetings are coming up very quickly. And so for staff to be able to present them with a complete plan, I think it's really important that you guys, if you're able to stick around, to power through that as fast as possible. What I would ask for you to do at this point, I mean, you have been task force members representing your neighborhoods for the life of this program, and I'd ask you to now go out after this is finished and spend the next 30, 60, 75 days talking to your neighborhood associations, educating them, and ideally setting up meetings for Daniel or his team to come talk to your neighborhood to get them comfortable with what's going on. I mean, you're sort of the liaison. You don't have to sell it, but we ask that you be the liaison to facilitate those meetings and to bring concerns and questions to staff. If you have concerns with any part of the area plan that you haven't already brought up, now is certainly the time. What would be unfortunate is if someone has sat through dozens of meetings, and then when it gets to the public hearing, at the city plan commission level or at council level, it's brought up at that point. It'd be nice to work through. Ideally, we work through all those issues now as a collective group of everyone on this call and with staff, so issues can be hammered out and not come as a surprise at the end. And ideally, my goal would be to get a letter from each participating neighborhood association with leadership signing off on supporting this plan and saying what they like about it, or if there's things that they would like to see added down the road, putting that in there too. But I don't think if we don't have letters from every single one of them, to me, that's certainly not a deal killer, but I think it makes it much more impactful if the neighborhoods embrace this and support it and want to be part of the history of passing, the largest area plan in the South that I'm aware of, at least in Oak Cliff. So with that being said, thanks again for your work, and I'm going to be doing some other work, but listening in for a lot of this. Thank you, Daniel.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and get us started. And first and foremost, we've got some public meetings coming up that Councilmember West mentioned. So we're going to have a virtual meeting and an in-person meeting to present the draft out. The virtual meeting is going to be on Wednesday, March 9th, and that's going to be at 6 p.m. It's going to be virtual on WebEx, it looks like. So that's something that we'll have more details in terms of like the link and all of that here in the next couple days, but just wanted to get that out there. And then we're also going to have an in-person event on Saturday, March 12th at 10 a.m. at Martin Weiss Park. And so that one is going to be, more of an open house. Obviously, both of these will have the ability to have bilingual access. The open house is going to be, I think, a little bit easier to present the material, since obviously it's a lot of material, and trying to present a matrix of recommendations and slides could take hours. And so, I think the virtual one's going to be a little bit more informational, and the in-person one's going to be a little bit more in the details if somebody wants that. We'll also, as the council member mentioned, we definitely want support and feedback from neighborhood associations and residents and other stakeholders. So we're going to have an online survey. We're going to have an in-person survey available at Martin Weiss Rec Center. And we'll have all of this available through the meetings as well. And we'll also have at the Rec Center, we'll have executive summaries in English and Spanish. Obviously, printing out the whole plan would be a lot. And so we'll just have the condensed versions, but we'll have the full plan online. And as Councilmember West mentioned, it's going to be, I'm happy to come meet with any neighborhood association here in the next, 2.5 months as needed. Yolanda, I see your question about will it be inside? We really don't have permission from the city yet to do indoor meetings, and so we're with large crowds. That could change between now and March 10th, but currently, the plan is to do it at the pavilion like we've done all the other ones. A few other things kind of in line with all this. So the process would be, we'll get the draft plan out on, I guess it would be March 9th. That's when the first meeting will be. That's when we're going to get the plan up on the website. We'll have a 60-day period for the community to review it, provide input. That's when we're happy to come meet with neighborhood associations. We'll take all that input. I'll present that back to the task force, sometime in May. and then we'll work through that and make tweaks to the plan and incorporate the input into the plan, with the goal of starting the adoption process at that point. It should be worth noting that this plan and just kind of the whole process of the area plan is going to be briefed to City Plan Commission's Forward Dallas Committee on March 8th. That was a date that was set a long time ago that is really out of my control because I'm just finding myself put on their calendar. But it actually jives really well with the fact that we've got public meetings right after that. So nothing at that briefing is going to be really a high level introduction to the plan for many folks who are representatives from around the entire city who probably don't know a whole lot about it because they haven't been tuned in, and that way they can ask some questions, give a little bit of feedback, and then be up to speed whenever we come back to them in the future. So that's really it. Maybe I'll pause right there and answer any questions if there are any questions. Okay, not seeing any hands or anything in the chat, but all right, so focus areas. So this is really all we have left to wrap up. I know I sent y'all in the email I sent out on Friday. I sent the list of all of the kind of the let's call them matrices of recommendations, lead department or agency funding. I sent all of that out on, what was it? I sent it out on Friday. So that was those are the ones that are tentatively going to be in the draft. I asked that y'all review those and just provide any last minute comments or concerns on them. And I think by and large, those are all things that we work through as a group. But if you've got a question or concern, please email myself and Mike, just so that we have it on record and we can review that and address it appropriately. So the last focus areas we have for tonight are West Davis, Hampton Clarendon, and then the 2 station areas. So on West Davis, back on last Thursday, I had a meeting with Barbara and the Beverly Hills Neighborhood Association, along with some representatives from the El Tivoli Neighborhood Association, El Tivoli being just on the other side of Davis from our study area, and really just, took an hour and a half to listen to them, to hear, what are their concerns, what are some issues from a land use perspective that maybe they are concerned about moving into the future, and how could this plan maybe help address some of those. So I'll just kind of read through those quickly. There was a lot of questions about the street reconstruction on West Davis. That's something that's already funded. The design has not been finalized at all because it's something that is still in the engagement process through our transportation department and public works department. It's a split project with the county. I'm trying to track down more information on just what the status on that is. But the plan is to provide bike lanes on Davis in, on the northern end of our study area. As part of that, because there's obviously a lot of head-in parking and stuff along West Davis, there were concerns about spillover parking into the neighborhood due to roadway redesign. There was a desire to allow for remote parking lots for businesses to help ease some parking issues. And actually, now I say that, I forgot to add that into my recommendation, so I'll add that in. So it's something that right now I don't believe is allowed in part of the West Davis area in PD 631, but it is allowed in PD 830. And that would just mean that if multiple businesses, had a single lot that they were sharing for their businesses, instead of having to have parking directly on site, maybe it's half a block away. That would be something that would be allowed. And I don't think it's permitted today. There was a desire to see no more bars or nightclubs, tire shops, payday lenders, pawn shops, vape shops, wine and beer shops. I know that bars, clubs, and nightclubs are not permitted in PD 631 or in PD 830. Those other ones that I highlighted, those are on a PD specific basis. I currently have building inspection going with a fine tooth comb through the code, and we're trying to figure out what's allowed, how are they defined, things like that. And we'll obviously work that into the recommendations depending on what we find. A desire to see more sit-down restaurants, concern about lack of code enforcement and code compliance issues. There were a couple areas in PD 631, which I'll show here in a second, that there were some concerns about what was allowed. So some of those uses were gas stations, car washes, and drive-through restaurants. And then there was a concern about just how difficult it is to get across West Davis. Right now, there's a traffic signal at Westmoreland, and then there's one at Plymouth, but that's about a mile stretch where there's no light or any sort of pedestrian signal. And so, making improvements to that, either through a traffic signal or some sort of hawk flashing beacon, was something that came up. So these are those two sub-districts. I know it's really small. This area right here in blue, these two areas in blue, and then this area on the south side in blue. Those are all areas where there's a number of uses that the community is concerned about that are allowed, like car washes. Those are things that obviously don't really have great adjacencies to single family. At the same time, it's also sitting right next to a major floodplain with Coombs Creek, and so from an environmental perspective, it's not a good location for a car wash. And so in working with them, really came up with two new recommendations that we hadn't included. The first one is to consider future amendments to PD 631 to those three specific sub-districts within that PD to not allow car washes, car washes, drive-throughs, and gas stations due to their proximity to single family. And then the other point was that comment about having some sort of traffic signal or hawk signal along West Davis between Westmoreland and Plymouth, mainly to give safe crossing for pedestrian, but also to help mitigate speeding traffic and calm that street down a little. So those are the kind of the two new recommendations that came out of that meeting. But in general, it was a really productive meeting with a lot of really good input. I don't know if Barbara's on. I don't know if Barbara's got anything she wants to add. Hearing nothing, I'll keep us moving unless there's questions on this section from folks.
Looks like she raised her hand.
Oh.
But...
Go ahead, Barbara. You can come off. If you can come off, I think you're muted, but feel free to chime in. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
I have a question I'll stop when she comes on, but I'm curious if there are currently any of those things that are not permitted here. So in those tracks, are there existing car washes, drive-through restaurants, or gas stations? I know they're very close.
Yeah.
To that, but are they in there?
So on this one at the northwest corner of Plymouth, I think technically it's a pawn shop, which is also a non-conforming use. So that's a use that today is not allowed, but it existed before the zoning changed about 20 years ago. If that were to close and stay closed for 6 months, then it's gone. So that one, no. And I think in these two other areas, not currently, no. They are challenging. They're not very deep because, as you can tell, especially on this stretch between kind of around Westmount, those are 100-foot deep properties. So it's probably unlikely that any of those uses would choose those just because of the size and shape of the property. I think the biggest concern had to do with small gas stations. And then on LCF4 right here, I don't think so. So I don't think any of those uses exist today. So it wouldn't be, making anything illegal that exists today. It would just be preventing those uses from coming in the future. But along the corridor, there's actually a fair number of those uses, and most of those are non-conforming, although there are a few over kind of west of Westmoreland that are permitted by right and are conforming. So really, it's only in the stretch from Westmoreland east that there's anything that's non-conforming today.
Okay.
Hey, Barbara, have you figured out how to come off mute? And if not, maybe it might be easiest to call in, and I'm happy to come back to this section. Okay. I'm going to keep us moving. And Barbara, if you're able to come off mute, we'll obviously bounce back to this section. Okay, so next, Hampton Clarendon. I know that we spent a little bit of time at the last meeting going through this. And so, and I also know Greg with Hampton Hills had to hop off right when we got started. And so I definitely wanted us to spend some time on this section. As we talked about last time, some of the comments, desire for traffic calming along Hampton, a desire, there's strong support for the existing local businesses, but there's a desire to have the area just be generally safer for pedestrians and cyclists. A desire for a pocket park or open space in the area, and that was something that Councilmember West mentioned, and it's something that he's run up the flagpole all the way, in the Parks Department to try to find an opportunity to perhaps purchase some land in the future. There's a lot of older buildings that really contribute to the character of the area, so there was a desire to protect those. A general comment that a lot of the auto repair uses, tire shops, detract from the area. A desire for development to be no more than 2 or 3 stories tall. Strong support for neighborhood retail in the area, but also a desire to see other allowed uses in the area, like some residential uses, and a desire to not see suburban style commercial uses. And by that, really thinking about things that are, parking lots up in the front, gas stations, things like that. So these are the recommendations. They really haven't changed, minus what I highlighted, which is really small, and we'll talk about it. So the first recommendation was consider amending the CR. Most of this area is zoned CR. There are a few tiny pockets that are zoned MU1, CS, or PA, which is parking, to allow for mixed-use development along Hampton Road between West 12th and Brandon, and along Clarendon between Hampton and Marlboro. New zoning should consider a form-based district that will result in a walkable urban form with active facades and wide sidewalks, while also ensuring appropriate setbacks and residential proximity slopes to adjacent single-family uses. Development should be limited to the existing height limit of 54 feet. That's what's currently allowed in the zoning, that's what's currently allowed in CR. A few of those other categories allow actually for higher uses, except for parking, which doesn't allow for any development at all. Development should be limited. I already said that. Permitted residential uses should allow for small multifamily development and townhomes with appropriate urban design standards. As a part of this, consider expanding that's a typo, the scope of the existing authorized hearing north to include the commercially zoned properties along Hampton between Burlington and West 12th. That's another 2-block area that right now is zone CR that is not included in the authorized hearing, but could be. Next one, consider amending the zoning to prohibit automotive-centric uses, including drive-throughs, restaurants, drive-through banks, car washes, gas stations, auto repair shops, in order to facilitate the type of walkable mixed-use development desired by the community. And then lastly, in conjunction with the citywide parking code reform, consider parking code reductions for all existing commercial structures, and consider shared parking use agreements with surrounding properties, and permitting adjacent on-street parking to count towards parking requirements to enable easier redevelopment of historic structures. Essentially what that's saying is, right now we know a lot of these old buildings are unable to get any sort of tenants in them because they don't have enough parking to provide. But if we allowed on-street parking to count, or maybe a shared parking lot with an adjacent use, maybe there's a church that they could do a shared parking agreement with, then they might be able to have some of those uses come into those buildings. So just making it more flexible, while also trying to prevent spillover parking. So this was something that I shared with some folks who, all the neighborhood associations that border this area previously. I'll do a little bit of explaining on it because I know it looks like a geometry, like a trigonometry problem. So residential proximity slope is essentially something that is written into our code that prevents buildings next to single family from being as tall as they're allowed to be by the zoning, to be respectful of their adjacency to single family. So it's calculated typically in our base zoning, it's calculated at a over 3 up 1 ratio. It's like an 18.5-degree angle. So what that means is on an indefinite line extending into infinity, which is this red line, that's how tall a building can be next to single family. So that said, the one deviation is you're allowed to build 26 feet, which is essentially 2 stories regardless. Anything more than that, you're not allowed to build. So looking at a typical lot along Hampton, which are about 140 feet deep, give or take, you know, what we found is that right now you can only really build a 2-story building with the ability to squeeze in about 25 feet of development on a 3rd story before you'd hit that invisible line. What that means is you're never going to get a 3rd story because a 25-foot deep, 3rd floor is economically not worth it, because typically like an apartment building, for instance, or an office building, they've got a floor plate that's at least 60 to 70 feet wide, which allows for a hallway and office or retail on both sides, or office or residential on both sides. So that's usually about 60 or 70 feet. 25 feet would really not make a lot of sense at all. I guess maybe you could have some sort of pop-up loft in a residential or something, but you would never see it happen. As Paul brought up in our last meeting, there was a general comment that, well, if 3 stories is not possible in the future, these sites become really difficult from an economics perspective, and it's unlikely for a long time that you'd see any sort of, redevelopment of these properties on some of the vacant parcels or anything different than what's there today. So using that as a starting point, I just said, hey, well, let's see what a 1/2 ratio looks like. And essentially what you can see on the image on the bottom is it would easily allow you to get to that 65-foot wide 3rd floor. I think a 4th floor would become very difficult. I'm not saying it'd be impossible, but it would be difficult. And I don't see a lot of developers striving to do that. But it would make a 3-story building along Hampton likely. Not saying it would happen, but it's just saying that it would be possible. But you would still have the 2nd floor obviously is within 15 feet of the property of the single family house, but then the 3rd floor would be offset by at least 80 feet because of that proximity slope line. So I kind of just wanted to put this out there as a starting point for conversation around this item, because I know that we talked about it a little last time. So I'll open it up to comments and questions. I see Barbara still has her hand up, but I assume that's from earlier. But I see Paul and Mary Lou both have their hands up. So let's start with Paul.
So a couple things. I mean, this makes sense. I mean, it's really kind of up to the neighborhoods in terms of what they want. Also, I did want to just briefly mention on the drive-through issue. There's a shopping center that's directly across from Tom Thumb, and I think more likely than not, they're gonna. I don't know if that's included in the area plan of saying, okay, restrict drive-throughs there, but I'm
I think it's
pretty
north of
confident.
12th. I think it's north
It's
of
north.
12th Street.
It is.
So it's just outside of our study area, technically.
Yeah, so I can tell y'all right now that's probably gonna get a few drive-throughs. I'm just, so I don't know if they want to make adjustments to that or account for that, but that is like the biggest assembled site outside the grocer, of course. So if you're gonna stick a bunch of things that generate a lot of traffic, that's the spot to do it. It's just something that, I felt was important to kind of bring up to the neighborhoods.
Yeah, Paul, so are you saying, if somebody desires drive-throughs, we're probably going to get it up there anyway? You don't have to be concerned about excluding them here?
No, no, no. Definitely try to exclude them. I'm saying that shopping center between 12th and Wentworth. If you're going to say what is the easiest place to put another drive-through today, and the answer is probably that shopping center. So you may want to include that proactively, because if not, you'll say, hey, we said no drive-throughs and everywhere else, and then they just go immediately 1 block north at a very obvious spot that's already retail and put a couple drive-throughs.
I see. You're suggesting maybe extending the limits of the area
Yeah,
plan.
you might want, you would want to extend it a little bit.
Paul, is that the side of Hampton and 12th? Where is that the side where Tom Thumb is, or is that the side where
You'd
the
want really you'd want to
restaurant?
do it on both sides, because I
But
don't
right
think
now,
Thumbs a
Tom
PD right now.
but right now,
Yeah.
only one side is in our plan. Is that correct? The one side, it's the side that's south of Tom Thumb.
I
I'm
think
bad with
so. Or
directions.
south of
So
12th
where
Street.
El
But you think,
Tapatio is, where that restaurant is,
yeah,
that's part of our
I
plan, but
think
where
so.
Tom
Yeah,
Thumb
I
is
think that's where it
not.
stops. And I
Yeah,
That
so
would
our
make
study
thinking
area,
really,
Tom
when he
Thumb is in
said,
our study area, and then everything south of 12th is in our study area. But that 1 block of retail where the Rent-A-Center is, I'm just looking at a map in T-Mobile, and that's not technically in West Oak Cliff. Retail. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, come on.
Paul,
I think I'm having a technical issue here.
okay, yeah. Yeah, we can't hear you. Let me turn it
Okay,
over to Mary Lou, and then we'll come back. Yeah, we're struggling to hear you, Paul.
Okay. Okay.
Mary,
Can I
why
go?
don't you go ahead first?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just wanting to comment on the area there in Jimtown and Hampton to like Emmett to Brandon. Where the buildings are at.
Mhm.
In that area. Talking to some of the neighbors in that area. They would really like to see maybe some businesses, in that area. I know parking is an issue, but that would be something that could be, looked at as far as to, just to keep businesses in that little area, as opposed to they're afraid if you put something like townhomes or apartments that would jeopardize their, their existing, they want to downgrade to residential. So they're just concerned about that. So I just wanted to mention that to you.
Okay.
And as soon as we can, we'd love for you to come talk to our neighborhood association, Daniel.
Yeah, happy to.
I think that speaks to taking a look at what is on the screen now, that maybe leaving it as it is so that they stay small, maybe or limiting them to 2-story, like some of the other neighborhoods have requested. Maybe, encourages more small business as opposed to that upright horizontal development.
Right, 2 stories fine, I think.
I think so there have been a few discussions kind of back and forth with a few of the folks in this area. I think the fear is if you do limit it the way it is, you'll have what exists there as far as buildings for a long time. If you relax it a little, you may see somebody come in and be able to put a mixed use something and increase business along the street with possible apartments or condos up above. And that's kind of what we've been struggling with is, well, do we want to force those buildings to stay the way they are? or do we want to see something possible in the future? And so that's why Daniel, I think, Daniel, that's why you created this, right? To kind of show us, if you're going to let something happen, how do we protect what it sounds like is the concern over privacy, still while allowing new businesses and things to come in?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm just looking at the map on the aerial. There is on the south side of Clarendon, there is, there's a variety in the depth of how deep some of those commercial properties are. Some of them are 100 feet or less on the Jimtown side, whereas on the Hampton Hills side, it's half a block deep. So those are more like 150 feet deep. That naturally, as a factor, using this 1/2 run would prevent between Brandon. I'm just kind of looking between Brandon and Kingston on those 2 blocks. You would never be able to get a building over 2 stories, because even at the ratio on the bottom image, above Kingston, you might be able to closer to the corner with Clarendon. I just kind of wanted to be clear about that. So I saw Yolanda raised her hand.
I guess, yeah, and my concern is by relaxing the standards, you sort of give somebody permission to try to do that. And again, I mean, it's not my neighborhood. I'm deferring to Jimtown, especially because that really butts up to Jimtown. And so I think it's their residents that stand to lose privacy. My other question would be, when we relax the parking, does that have the potential to increase parking on the residential streets? And I think the neighbors need to know that in order to make an informed decision.
Sure, absolutely. I think on the parking, it would depend on if it's a new building or an existing building. An existing building, that's where we'd be recommending the parking reduction. One thing that we could recommend is not the number of required spaces to be reduced, but how and where you locate them. So that now on Hampton right there's no on-street parking, and there never will be. Clarendon is more likely where you'd see the on-street parking in the future. But maybe on those properties south of Clarendon, there's an opportunity to, use one of the local churches for a shared parking agreement or something like that. So maybe it needs to be a little bit more detailed by quadrant of, because every little 4 sides of this intersection is going to be a little bit different.
So yeah, so as a follow-up, could we be that specific in our recommendations? And then 2, just with regard to these recommendations about how we relax the requirement, the RPS requirement, could that also be quadrant specific? So saying that the neighborhoods that Hampton that backs into Jimtown might have a different requirement than, say, what you mentioned, Clarendon that backs into Hampton Hills.
Yeah, I mean, we can recommend anything if that's what people support.
Oh, I'm back.
All right, go ahead, Paul.
So I've been listening in. It sounds like affordability isn't too big of a concern at the moment. But based on this whole privacy thing, I mean, besides hey, we're in like a major city and all that kind of stuff, why not have a requirement that if you go, the slope thing sounds like might still be too complicated. Why not just have a requirement that they need to plant a tree within the rear 20 feet of the lot? Because none of the heights you're proposing isn't anything that an oak tree couldn't eventually grow to.
Yeah, we definitely do have landscaping requirements, landscape buffer requirements in our zoning all over. So that's definitely something we have.
Yeah, so I mean, just if you said, okay, you have to plant plant an oak tree or some tree that will eventually grow to a minimum of 30 feet within the rear 20 feet of the lot. If you go over 2 stories, I think that would address I think, a lot of the privacy, and you wouldn't have to go block by block trying to figure out this calculation of, oh, is there enough, RPS for this? And it still goes with the base assumption of, we're assuming that the RPS works as if every property is flat, right? Because it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but RPS doesn't work just on where the house is. It works on single family zoning. So it could even be a vacant lot and it would still project. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so it's the way RPS projects from the property line of any single family zoned property. It could be a vacant lot. It doesn't project from like a commercial property, but it does from any sort of single family property. That's where it projects from.
Man, single family is kind of sacred.
You think so?
I think that's the point, Paul.
Yeah. But yeah, that might be the easiest way to make the adjustment there. But yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it in terms of my comments.
I saw Bob had his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to make a couple of observations. Besides the residential proximity slope, there's also the maximum height issue that you can build into the zoning. So if indeed you really only want a 2-story structure to be built there in the first place, you can come in and the zoning can be modified to have a different maximum height. The residential proximity slope, at least in my experience, has always been used to make sure that you don't build something that looms over a single family house. And doesn't provide sight lines for people in those upper stories to look in your bedroom window. And when we did the PD 830, we actually use a 1-to-1 residential proximity slope, because when you looked at that line, it still didn't allow those upper stories to peer into your bedroom, if you will. And it allowed a little bit more flexibility in the design. So like on this particular drawing, if we were to mandate an 11-foot sidewalk on the front when you build a new structure, all of a sudden that structure may only have 30 foot on that top floor instead of 40. So I would even take it and look at a more aggressive residential proximity slope, as long as we take into account the maximum height to determine how many stories we really want. And last thing, and just sort of a quick aside on the parking requirements that you're recommending, I would ask that you consider legacy status or legacy building status that we've used in other PDs, especially for the cool old structures. So there's some really neat old strip centers along Hampton that I would hate to see torn down. And even if you lowered their parking requirements, that may not give them the viability that you want. And so you may want to come back in and visit the legacy status, which allows a cool old building to exist as retail or by right, with or without the parking, because most of their parking was taken away when Hampton got widened. So those are the only thoughts I had, is that we've got that tool of maximum height to determine how tall we really want the buildings to be. You might want to look at a more aggressive residential proximity slope to allow, especially if you mandate wide sidewalks on the front, some viable second or the third and maybe even a 4th story, if indeed that's what the zoning would allow. And then legacy status. That's what I got.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think that's a good comment about the legacy status I've seen that in other PDs, and I didn't use that specifically in the language, but that's kind of what I was trying to get at when I said existing commercial structures. I mean, I can change that to say legacy structures. I think that, yeah, we've seen it have success scattered throughout town. So that's what I was leaning at. I just didn't use that exact language.
Then you had to just determine what is a legacy structure.
Yeah, and it gets defined differently depending on, I know like in the Cedars, it's anything built before 1971, because that was 50 years before the zoning code was redone. So we can define it on however we want in theory. And that's something that gets determined through the authorized hearing process. Elena, I see you got your hand up.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that that strip center across from the Tom Thumb on Hampton is not a part of the area plan. How did that?
Yeah,
I actually think you're right, Elena, because I'm looking at the map and it says 12th and Hampton. So that strip center on the south side would be part of it. That's where Tepa is, Caitlin.
Yeah,
We're
gotta
talking
be.
on the north side. I think we're talking north of our boundary is north of 12th.
Yeah.
Or sorry, south of 12th. And
Well, yeah.
I think what Paul was talking about is the strip that's between Wentworth and 12th, right?
Yeah.
Is,
We're having a sidebar conversation about this restaurant Tepa, which is at the corner of 12th and Hampton, about whether that's on the south or the north side.
It's on the north side of 12th. I'm on Google Maps on my other computer right this
Okay,
second.
so Tepa is not in it.
so Tepa is not part of the area plan. Okay.
I don't really get that either,
I
but
don't understand. I mean, if most of the area plan goes up to Davis, I don't understand this.
Yeah, so this boundary got drawn obviously a long time ago based off a couple factors. It had to do with where we based it off of neighborhood association boundaries. We based it off of census tracts and census block group boundaries. And then we also based it off of where there was the areas where there had never been any sort of plan. So if you get north of 12th, obviously in this area, it's still part of Sunset Hill, but as soon as you get over a few blocks, it gets into the Winnetka Heights zoning.
Yeah.
And so really everything north of 12th is Winnetka Heights.
Okay. Odd. Okay.
And I mean,
Yeah.
again, we're making a recommendation. We're making a recommendation on West Davis about a thing that's immediately across the street. We could make the recommendation on this as well.
I think we should. I mean, I think we should, because otherwise things become kind of I mean, it doesn't make sense not to. That's all.
Yes, my commercial counterparts will hate me for this, but seriously, if you guys ban drive-throughs on every site and then leave that one site open, you're literally just handing them a monopoly on it, and they will have a pad before you know it. You would have just eliminated their competition and left them out. You have to eliminate the entire corridor, not just stop it at 12.
I guess I just want to know, is it a Whataburger? Because then I might have to think about it.
Well, you can roll the dice.
So I see that Mary Lou still has her hand up. I don't know if you had anything else to say. Caitlin's also got her hand up. So Mary, if you've got something, and if not, I'll turn it over to Caitlin.
Looks like you put her hand down.
You can go ahead.
Okay. I will say 12 is, Sunset Hill used to be cut in half. We actually do different state reps based on whether you live north or south of 12. But aside from that, I do think it's probably a good idea to include that strip center up to where the homes begin on Hampton in the area plan, or at least mention it in this recommendation. There's that strip where Tepa is up until I forget the name of the street, but then there's homes north of that, which obviously we don't want to, touch the zoning of those homes and stuff.
Yeah, well, we can easily make that recommendation.
And I will say, Greg and Gerardo, who is with East Hampton Hills, and I have been in contact, and we will reach out to you, Daniel, about coming to discuss this with our neighbors, because I think Yolanda is exactly right. We really need to discuss this residential proximity slope with our neighbors who are most directly affected, meaning those along Hollywood Avenue specifically, and then closest to Clarendon.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's why right now if you see, it's kind of vague, ensuring appropriate setbacks and proximity slopes. And, the devil's in the details, and we want to get the details right. And I think that's where having some of these, specific conversations with neighborhoods is important. And again, also a lot of this will get fleshed out in the authorized hearing process.
For
we
sure.
want to include as much as we can in the area plan as possible. So.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel.
So Daniel, let me ask this question, Daniel. Are we then saying that on Hampton between 12th and Davis, the east side of Hampton, one lot in on Hampton would be part of the plan?
I don't think so. No, we're just saying that that one half block area, which is part of the same zoning district as everything else to its south, should be considered as part of the same authorized hearing, which makes sense because we're kind of randomly lopping off one little area and treating it differently for no real reason. And that's similar to what we're talking about in West Davis, where what happens on one side of the street obviously affects the other side. And so it's really, when you're talking about a corridor, it's really hard to exclude the other side of the street. So it's just that one area, that one half block area between Wentworth and 12th on the east side of the street.
And we're not saying that's part of the WOCAP area. It's just that we're recommending that any authorized hearing for the western side of Hampton would include the eastern side together.
Correct. And yeah, that's right. And, luckily it also backs up to Sunset Hill. And since we got Caitlin and Sunset Hill as a part of this process, it's not like we're getting into a neighborhood that's not, involved in the process at all.
Okay.
Greg, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I almost forgot about that. Thanks. I just got sidetracked with Barbara asking about 11-foot sidewalks and trees planted there as well, and I'm fully on board with that. I am, just so everybody knows, I'm with Hampton Hills, which is involved with this here, and yes, we're trying to work with Sunset Hill to get this all sorted out. Daniel, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. I'm used to seeing, well, if a developer wants to come in and do something that's like a little different, they're going to go to a specific plan development. And at that point, they're going to go and they're going to talk to the neighborhoods to figure out maybe what they can give the neighborhood, what the neighborhood wants, so that the developer can get what they want. So for example, hey, I want to go up 50 feet tall. Well, the neighborhood says, no way. Then the developer says, but I'll plant you 20-foot tall trees immediately, just saying, I'll plant you 20-foot tall trees immediately and give you a 12-foot wall, masonry wall that looks real nice. And then the neighborhood can say, yes, okay, fine, we want it. What we're doing now, though, is setting up the authorized hearings to allow by right whatever we think is the best and highest use for this area, rather than go through individual PDs or PD amendments, right?
Yeah, that's right. The purpose of an area plan, and the purpose of this area plan, is to avoid the very process that you just talked about. Dallas's 1,050 PDs full of examples of developers negotiating their way to freedom, usually at the expense, ultimately, of the surrounding neighborhoods. If we have a strongly worded area plan that has a very well detailed vision of what people want on an area, and that's adopted by council, in theory, yeah, a developer could come in and say, I'm going to propose a PD here. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with City Plan Commission and City Council. City staff would look at the area plan and say, we recommend denial of that. We just rezoned this area to be an X. Worked with the community to get there, and this is a direct violation of that. Ultimately, whoever's on City Plan Commission or Council could change their mind. But the purpose is to have a very strong land use vision so that we don't end up with the exact situation you just talked about.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so developer could still come in and say, I like what's here. I want a little bit more. I'm going to try to go to PD, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. That's what it sounds like. The other thing is all the discussion about the residential proximity slope. We can talk about that on a neighborhood basis, but yeah, thank you for pulling that up. The fact that you can see privacy can be kept just even by building a 26-foot tall structure, 15-foot setback in the rear. Well, then plus probably what, another 15-foot alley. So
Yeah, this also doesn't show an alley, which I know if some of the properties have and some of them don't. So that's a good catch because there probably would be a 15-foot alley right here in a lot of instances.
yeah, so they get another 7 feet of height, 8 feet of height out of it eventually. But yeah, you can see how somebody could build 3, 4, 5 stories right up along Hampton if they really wanted to. I'm not suggesting it, but I'm just saying they could if they wanted to, and you still wouldn't be able, like Bob was saying, you still wouldn't be able to see into the backyards if the privacy is an issue. I just want to wrap my head around it, but that would require the building, 26 foot tall building, to be against that setback. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I think if I was a developer and I sold this property, I would probably, if you can see with my mouse, I would build a 3-story building in this envelope here, and then have parking or whatever in the back. So you would have, you know, an 80-foot setback, or the building would be 80 feet away from the adjacent single family. Yeah, some of that has to do with our parking ratios and, you know, if they could park it or not. But you know, that's maybe what you would often see. But you know, the other thing I think it's also worth recommending is, or you know, I know I showed max height of 54 feet. You know, a really good zoning district that I think might be worth considering for this area is our Article 13 form. And this I know this is a lot of jargon. Article 13 form-based district walkable mixed use 3. That only allows 50 feet and it allows 3.5 stories. So you would be able to do this, and you could have I think the way they define the half is, you know, you can have some loft space, you know, a certain percentage of area that can go up to a 4th floor, but the majority of it is going to be a 3-story building. So you know, that would be a zoning district that would make a lot of sense here. So you're basically saying no taller than 3 stories regardless. Even, you know, that would be included. You'd have that with whatever residential proximity slope we recommend.
Yeah, and thinking about all these things, did you tell me before there is really no, City of Dallas doesn't have line of sight requirements in their codes at all? I mean, you see it in surrounding cities, you know, whether it's rooftop equipment or loading spaces or whatever it is. There's all sorts of line of sight in other cities' zoning codes, but not in Dallas. Is that right?
We've got line of sight on things like intersections and, you know, how a driveway comes out, you know, for visibility. And then we've got requirements about, I don't even know if we actually have requirements about how you screen like AC units on your roof, but we do allow for an additional, a little bit of height, you know, to screen those things if you've got a structure to screen it. I don't know of any specific line of sight rules in our code that speak to kind of the issues that you're talking about.
Yeah, that sort of language I think would put a lot of the neighbors at ease. But I know you'd have to create it in the city of Dallas, it sounds like. Is a whole nother task, I know.
Yeah, and let me dig into that and talk to some people and maybe they know. Yolanda, I see you got your hand up.
Hi there. Well, I'm just thinking about Jimtown. I'm not by no means am I representing or speaking for Mary Lou, but it sounds like, so Greg, the other most impacted neighborhood is Hampton Hills. Is that correct? By these recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, Sunset Hill as well, but yeah, we've got a large stretch of Clarendon, a large stretch of Hampton.
Okay. I just, you know, just as a thought and a suggestion, I think just for, again, to just increase understanding and kind of buy-in, that if you guys, you know, if Jimtown and Hampton Hills could somehow get together with Sunset Hills so that everybody's, you know, kind of talking about it. And if there are questions that you guys can help answer for Jimtown or vice versa. Since it seems to me that Jimtown is the one that is most impacted by some of what's happening on Hampton. And so Mary Lou, don't intend to speak for you, but I just know in working with the neighborhoods, I'm just sharing the feedback I get.
Oh,
Thank you for using our phone verification system. Your code is
Bob, I think you're off mute.
Once again, your code is
I'm going to go ahead and
2811.
mute Bob.
Yeah, and Caitlin Vanderslice has done a great job of trying to get these neighborhood associations connected.
I agree.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeoman's work.
Jimtown, because of Hampton, honestly, and we can talk about Hampton, but that was kind of transportation. I'd love to talk about Hampton, but I don't want to spend too much time. But because of Hampton Road, Jimtown feels completely separate from the other side of the 110-foot right or whatever it is there. If we can stitch these together, that's great. But I think we'd have to open up the conversation about Hampton again and what we're doing to make that feel connected one side of the street to the other.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like in looking at the map, they stand to be, really impacted because those buildings at front Hampton are going to be they're going to be staring at their back doors or their side doors. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. Hampton Hills has homes fronting Hampton Road a little further south here, so I completely understand the impact that anything along Hampton would have to the neighborhood.
So maybe this is a good point. Well, Mary, I see you have your hand up if you want to go ahead.
Yes, I just want to make a quick comment. Yeah, we would love to connect with Hampton Hills and just get together and meet you guys since we are right across the street, and we will we'd like that very much. And thank you, Yolanda. No, just feel free to jump in. This is a big project, and it's gonna take a village, and we we're glad to we're open to input, but at the same time there's a lot to take in, but we welcome any comments that's or suggestions that will help. But we're looking forward to meeting with Hampton Hills. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll meet
Yeah, thank you.
in our neighborhood parks somewhere. Oh wait, we're trying to get those, right?
Yeah, so actually this is a kind of a good transition to this. So I know we kind of talked about this last time and I've shared this with folks. So this isn't really very new, but the two things I kind of wanted to highlight. So this is a vacant piece of land. It's not to say it's where a pocket park would go. It's just to say, hey, it's a piece of vacant land. Maybe there's an opportunity for that to be some sort of a small park or plaza. Councilmember West has run that one to the Parks Department. That could be an opportunity for like using bond funds from the next bond to acquire land. Another thing that's worth noting, and this is going to be a conversation that I know the council member's office is going to be reaching out to the surrounding neighborhoods. So that'd be Jimtown and Sunset Hill and Hampton Hills, has to do with this intersection right here at Hampton and Clarendon. It's hard to tell the property line today. There's a large area that's currently essentially being illegally used by a property owner. So there's a large amount of city-owned land that is an opportunity to think about a spot for a plaza or public art or both. Obviously, it would require money and reconstruction and all of that, but it could be a really great it really is the crossroads center of West Oak Cliff. And at the same time, it's something that it's not the 7-Eleven, Yolanda. I don't actually know the name of it. It's an auto repair, auto service shop, I believe. So that's that's an opportunity. I'll go through the recommendations written wise because it's just easier. So one had to do with prioritizing sidewalk installation and repairs along Hampton, along, I guess I say right, that's kind of not in this area, but prioritizing sidewalk installation and repair along the entirety of Hampton, pursuing tree plantings along Hampton, sidewalk and public realm improvements along Hampton between Brandon and 12th, which would include street light, new enhanced lighting and street trees, opportunities for new traffic signals or traffic control devices along Hampton between Brandon and 12th. I think at Brandon and at Burlington are probably the best spots for that. I duplicated, I saved the tree plantings again. And then bike lanes along Clarendon. That piece of vacant land is an opportunity for, or maybe a different piece of vacant land is an opportunity for a park or open space in the area. And then something, and then this is kind of vague. And this is, I just pulled this from our overall overarching recommendations about traffic calming along Hampton. Something that Greg and I talked about on the phone one time is that the way we calculate, there was a road diet conducted on Hampton and it caused traffic. And the recommendation from our engineers was we can't do it because it caused traffic. That's because we measure things with the level of service and not with accounting for all modes. And so a general recommendation can and should be to considering all modes, not just vehicular modes, in thinking about improvements and opportunities. Because, one thing that's talked about is maybe in the future, you could have bus only dedicated lanes through this area, even if it's just during certain hours, to allow for efficient movement in the area. So that's all I've got on Hampton Clarendon. Happy to bounce back and forth, but know we want to dive into the last two areas. So
may I take this moment to bring something up related?
Sure, yeah.
Pages back, and again, I guess it's one of our overall recommendations throughout, and I discussed this with Daniel, but I just want to put it out there. I know that there's a big concern about auto shops, tire shops, and then things like drive-throughs and car washes. And I put this out here to my distribution and got feedback. And I know Elena has been part of those kind of threads, as has Gerardo and Caitlin. And so I defer because it's not my neighborhood. But my concern is this, that we kind of limit future use in these areas, and we say it's going to include auto shops and tire repair shops. Maybe because we do or don't use those, but some people are using them. So the feedback I've gotten is that they're viable small businesses, and do we want to blanketly limit their potential in the future? So one of the recommendations that was made, again, on this email thread, is that this opportunity to engage a tool like a special use permit, so that if somebody, as opposed to saying you can never do that they could be able to come forward and apply for a special use permit. And then the neighborhood has the opportunity to engage and mobilize and review and speak to it either way. But, and again, the feedback I'm getting, it's not so much about, the corporate banks or the 7-Elevens or those things that are, corporate chains. What the feedback was is about these kind of cornerstone small businesses that, have a potential contribution to the community. So I just want to put that out there, is that if this task force would consider that as an option, in addition to or instead of, I guess not instead of, because I think like Daniel said, the devil is in the details, and it's when we get to the authorized zoning process that those decisions are made. I just feel like it gives us an opportunity to consider options if we can add that as an option.
And one thing, thanks for bringing that up, Yolanda. And one thing I just wanted to add is just kind of clarify for folks who are a little unsure about what non-conforming means and all of that, is if the zoning were changed and a use that exists today is no longer conforming in the new zoning, they're allowed to operate forever, so long as they don't close and stay closed for more than 6 months. So a good example that Barbara knows very well is nightclubs used to be allowed on West Davis. There used to be upwards of 20 of them up there. And over 20 years, they've slowly closed for whatever reason. And now there's one, which I don't want to say hopefully, I'm not allowed to have an opinion in it. There's one that looks like it's closed and is currently appealing to the county. So, 20 years later, those uses are gone based off forces of economics. At the same time, along West Davis, tire shops and auto repair shops are no longer allowed. But many of them are still there and very viable, as Yolanda mentioned. So it doesn't mean that we're closing them down. It just means that no new ones can come in. Just wanted to clarify that.
I think Greg has a couple of good questions in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg. Sorry, I'm just seeing the chat. Are non-conforming businesses able to sell their business and continue operating under different ownership? I believe the ownership can change so long as the CEO doesn't. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I think Yolanda's point is good, that if these businesses are, I look at, I'll name Mustang, Brake and Muffler at the corner. They are very respectful of their space, and they're clean, and they're organized. They're parked very well. If they're continuing to be successful and they want to cash out their business and sell it to somebody else and move on with their family business some other place, are they able to do that and market that as a, look what we built, we want to sell this to somebody? I think that's probably an important question to ask.
I believe that the answer to that is what Daniel said, though, is that as long as the CEO does not change, then the ownership of the business can actually change by being sold, unless the city council has imposed what is called a amortization ordinance over that area. And an amortization ordinance, like on Lower Ross Avenue, for example, near downtown, there was amortization there, so that if those automobile shops sold, then the CO went away, and their ability to stay there went away. But they were given years to sell. They were, in other words, they were given a number of years to sell, but they realized that the handwriting was on the wall and they had to leave. And now Ross Avenue there is what it is. It was the idea that they wanted it changed, and the city council has the power to change it. But that's a very special deal. The amortization ordinance is normally grandfathering last through multiple ownerships, is my understanding.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be recommending anything like that here.
Right. Of course not. We've never mentioned that at all here.
Yeah, I'm just thinking I guess I look back to, again, my olden days in Oak Cliff, where, in Davis, there were gas stations, and I can remember still being able to get somebody to pump my gas and wash my windshields. And so, who are we to say that we might not want to make that available to some cool retro person in the future that wants to have some, auto themed place, and then them not have the opportunity at all because we've had this blanket overlay because of how we perceive auto places. So I'm just saying, if we could recommend these other options, like a special use permit where people had to go through a process to get approved, then again, we just open up another tool or something that we can discuss as we go forward.
I think it's just too difficult to say, well, but we don't want a national chain to move in. We're okay if it's locally owned, but I don't want another Valvoline or whatever it might be.
Yeah, you can change branding, whenever you want. That's kind of the challenge. Sorry to jump in there, but I mean, that's kind of the challenge of this, is that there are too many ways to get around rules like that. If you said, okay, you put it in an SUP, for starters, many of your locals are going to have a hard time going through the zoning process. If Dallas developers themselves don't like going through zoning and SUPs, the local shops that you're talking about, they definitely aren't going to want to go through SUPs and all that process. The other thing with that is that in practice, if you said anything such as, hey, we can do a gas station with an SUP or repair shop, that's going to actually, I'd look at that from a development standpoint as, oh, there's a barrier to entry here. So I should try extra hard to, put stuff together for the purpose of creating a gas station or an auto shop. because you've basically created this extra barrier of entry. And if I can get through the SUP process, then it's unlikely that another auto user or gas station can get in there with me. I would, again, against a lot of the commercial real estate industry, I would recommend that you just make it a general, don't allow it. You're grandfathering those who are there, they're there. But based on everything else you guys are saying, I would just look grandfathered and don't even put an SUP. If someone really has a cool concept, they already kind of know to go ask the zoning question anyway. So that won't be anything new.
And optimistically, the environmentalist in me says that all cars are going to be electric in 20 years. So, Greg, I get your hand up again.
Yeah, sorry. I remember my initial question because we were talking about Hampton Road, and we said, well, let's bring all the ideas out now that may come during a public hearing, when these are happening. And we mentioned trying to marry together what's happening with the Hampton Road calming measures that we're trying to look at, and this plan. The more I look at it, the more I wonder, what did North Oak Cliff do at, what is it, Sylvan, going through, just south of 30, just along the Kessler districts. They closed off two of the 6 lanes that go north there. They did that in like 2015, something.
Well, that is getting striped in for a bike lane.
And they were able to stripe it in for a bike lane on top of all that. Hampton is probably not too much different, except now maybe it's taking more of the congestion that decided to route around that area to get to 30. And then we see the 2-way conversion of Polk and Tyler, which is another traffic calming measure. Is there some effort? Is there some more effort? I know this is not the Hampton Road Plan task force, but is there some more effort that can be put into looking at Hampton? Because it seems like a lot of things are happening in Oak Cliff, just not West Oak Cliff. That's generally, I think, something that is going to want to come up during the public meetings. So you don't have to answer that right now, Daniel.
Yeah, and I kind of expressed that in some ways my hands are tied, in the sense that engineers are explicitly telling me that taking away a lane is a non-starter, and I mean, because we as planning and urban design staff went and talked to them and got laughed out of the room. It was a virtual meeting, so and it's just because it had to do with traffic numbers and stuff, and so I think that's why I made the recommendation about that and I don't have it on the screen, or else I would show it. And it's in the recommendation for transportation and infrastructure, but reevaluating all of these projects to not use level of service as the way that we calculate their success, so that we set ourselves up for Hampton and other streets to say, hey, maybe taking away a lane does make sense because it does X, Y, and Z for pedestrians or cyclists. So, I mean, I think it's a conversation that has to happen, but my hands are kind of tied currently.
It just has to do with the rate of speed that people get on Hampton. By the time they get to Clarendon, they're going, 50, 60 miles an hour sometimes. It's very, very scary.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to keep us moving to the next section. We can come back to this if we need to. So I'm going to start with Hampton Station area and Tyler Station area with talking about this missing middle housing piece. I hope most folks were able to make that tour, the 2 tours that Paul pulled together. I know I saw some of y'all on one of them. Really the conversation, this goes back to our conversation that we were having about thinking about affordability and having, having additional price points of unit types, different additional unit type options, which allow for different, housing choice, which in turn allows for different price points. So, right now in the vast majority, there's like one or two little properties that are zoned to R5, but almost everything around these two DART stations that's not a commercially zoned property is zoned to R75. And so the recommendation that we had put forward was, well, what if you allowed single family, you also allowed duplexes and accessory dwelling units by right as well? And then some other housing types that maybe should be considered under certain conditions, which we'll kind of go through in each one of these, is triplexes, quadplexes, cottage homes, and narrow lot single family. This is a starting point for conversation. Most lots that are zoned to R75 are 7,500 square feet or thereabout. Would it make sense to allow triplexes on larger lots, so things that are 10,000 square feet or larger? Allow quadplexes on either corner lots or on lots that are double the size of what the zoning allows? Cottage homes on these large lots, 20,000 square feet or larger, and then narrow lot single family on lots that are at least 60 feet wide and at least 150 feet deep. So what that amounts to is a 9,000 square foot. It'd have to be at least a 9,000 square foot lot. This is more kind of high level urban design considerations, thinking about how windows and entries and balconies and porches are directed towards the street so that you have people walking in and out of a front door. They can look out onto the street, eyes on the street. Thinking about how buildings are situated to minimize windows and balconies that look over other people's private space. Thinking about height and outdoor spaces in the same way. Thinking about just usable open space for residents on that lot. That's private open space, I should say. And probably the most important has to do with parking, which is requiring parking to not be in the front yard. So we don't want people putting all of their parking as like a one massive long driveway right off the curb, but instead locating parking in the rear, putting garages in the rear, maybe putting them off of an alley if an alley exists. And if it has to be in the front, making sure that those garages are recessed behind the front of the house so that the front of the house is what you see, not the garage. Driveways, I spent a lot of time driving around on Google Street View and in real life around these two DART stations, and almost all of the driveways I saw are just a single lane driveway. So limiting driveways to be no wider than 14 feet so you don't get these huge curb cuts. If you've got, allowing for shared driveways, because that's something that we see. Like I know my neighborhood, people share driveways with their neighbors, but making sure that even then it's only one curb cut and not a really wide driveway. The setbacks would be the same as single family. The massing, lot coverage would be the same. Height would be the same. I think it's important that, as I talked about, that you have front doors that face up to the street and not away from the street, as we see on some new buildings these days. And then this part about architectural requirements, I think that's really important, that needs to get fleshed out on an area basis and not through this process, because I think the best tool to get a lot of these options implemented would be through a conservation district. And that's where the architectural requirements can really come in. And actually all of these things can be implemented that way. Just wanted to do some quick diagrams to kind of show what this looks like. I know the house kind of looks like the house in The Simpsons, but just kind of saying there's two different ways that you can have accessory dwelling units in our code. It can either be an attached unit, so some person decides, hey, we're empty nesters, nobody's using our upstairs, let's make it, an apartment that we rent out. Or you have a detached unit, which, maybe it's a unit above a garage, maybe it's an old garage that you've converted, maybe it's, whatever it is, it can be attached or detached. And then, as I said, our code is currently written, ADUs can't be taller than the main structure. Parking for the main house should be located ideally at the rear, but they do have to have an off-street spot provided. And then ADUs can't be larger than 700 square feet, which is about the size of an average one-bedroom apartment. For duplexes, you can either have duplexes side by side or stacked, as you see here. And then I kind of just wanted to show some how parking best practices for parking. So, ideally people could park off an alley and then the entire front yard would just be open to, facing the street. An alternative might be, 2 single car driveways with the garages recessed a little. Another alternative might be 1 long driveway that comes to the back that goes to a garage. And then what we don't want to see is these double garage monstrosities of duplexes that we see kind of popping up around town right now. So, that's something that we would strongly encourage recommending against, because, what it creates is just a massive driveway in front of people's properties. So then when we think about where triplexes and quadplexes would be permitted, that's where I went through and did some GIS analysis. Greg, I see your comment about chimneys. No, it's the average of the slope of the roof. So you can have like the point of the roof go above that height limit, and then chimneys and stuff can go above, but there's a limit. So it's not, chimneys aren't your height limit. It's the average of the top of your roof. So if we looked at all the properties in these areas that are zoned, that are larger than 10,000 square feet, it's a little bit more than 300 of 2,800 parcels. So you can tell it's not a whole lot of residentially zoned properties. As I noted in the past, a lot of these are churches or schools, and still others are impacted by floodplain and topography. So some of these you might not ever see any sort of development on them because they're a school. For quadplexes, it's even fewer. It's 118 out of 280, or 2,800. So again, a lot of those are schools. So we're not talking about a whole lot of locations, but there are some. Just some general best practices of kind of what this, what to consider. Again, the massing, they need to follow the same setbacks as the surrounding neighborhood. Height, massing's all the same. Parking should be located in the rear, either off an alley or maybe off a side street if it's a corner lot. And then the last bit are the idea about cottage homes. This would be limited to really only a handful of properties. Our recommendation is any lot that's over 20,000 square feet. And so that's all these in red. Some of these are obviously churches and schools as well, or impacted by topography or floodplain. I just wanted to model out kind of some of what this looks like. One recommendation is that obviously, no wide driveway. You have to have some sort of fire lane, probably because of our code. Max unit size of 1,500 square feet. So we're not talking about large units. Parking located away from the street, screened by landscaping if it's visible from the street. Same setbacks to single family. Same height as single family. Units that are near the street should front out to the street. This is a dwelling unit type that we don't see a lot of in Dallas. But on some of these large lots, you can begin to get a lot of single family homes, but still maintain the neighborhood character. And then this last one, narrow lot homes. This is a tougher one to make a map of. So everything that's in pink is by no means exactly the lots. I try my best to dig around in DCAD and understand measurements. We're not talking about a whole lot of properties. It's something like 75 total out of 2,800 that are wide enough and deep enough that would allow for narrow lot homes to be put on them. Again, some of these have topography or floodplain issues as well. But essentially what this would allow is, if it's wider than 60 feet and more than 150 feet deep, you're essentially taking that duplex, which would be allowed, and splitting it in half so that people have a little bit more privacy because they've got a wider lot. And I, recommended that parking is either located in the rear off an alley, or maybe they have a shared driveway that goes back to separate garages. That's something we see pretty often. These are similar to those ones that we saw near Mockingbird Station on the driving tour for folks who attended. So now diving into the Tyler Station area specifically, what did we hear from folks in the area? Generally, people love the access to nature, the green space, neighborhood character, the neighborhood diversity. There's a desire for improved lighting and sidewalks, traffic calming, and public safety, and really big concerns about affordability and displacement. Improved walkability and improved retail, but also don't desire large multifamily or townhome development. Although there were definitely some voices that said, hey, we need density next to transit. There was support for single family and duplex and accessory dwelling units, support for cottage homes, and support for neighborhood retail buildings. Again, as I mentioned, not strong support for townhomes, multifamily, or parking lots, and generally a desire for buildings to be no taller than 2 stories. So I'm going to move things around on my screen so I can read these. So the land use recommendations that we have compiled for this area are within a half mile of Tyler Vernon Dart Station, modify the zoning through conservation districts or an overlay zoning tool is an option to permit some of these missing middle housing types, including accessory dwelling units, duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes, narrow lot single family and cottage homes where applicable, that goes back to what we just talked about, to be allowed by right following architectural and urban design standards. Development would also be required to follow existing codes on things such as ADUs, since we already have codes on those, parking requirements, setbacks, things like that. In conjunction with parking code reform, consider parking code reductions for commercial, residential, and office uses within a half mile of the DART station to enable more financially viable development in these areas and to produce more walkable, pedestrian-oriented development in the future. For the small commercial area at Edgefield and Clarendon, which is previously filed authorized hearing, explore opportunities to amend to a form-based zoning district that encourages neighborhood scale mixed-use development and also reduces parking ratios, allowing on-street parking to count for requirements for commercial structures. Because right now, you've got really small structures and most of it's dominated by parking, and that's the only use. You'll never see a restaurant there because nobody could ever park a restaurant there. And then lastly, on all non-residentially zoned properties within a half mile of the DART station, explore opportunities to amend the zoning in the future to promote neighborhood scale mixed-use development with setbacks and scale that are contextually sensitive to their surrounding. The reason I'm kind of staying vague on that one is that those would be future authorized hearings. We haven't asked specifically about them, but I think the comment about 2 or 3 stories would be the same, that it needs to follow residential proximity slopes. It needs to be respectful of its neighbors. And so this is just a map of where those areas are. Those are all the areas within the half mile circle that aren't zoned single family. So as you can tell, it's not a whole lot. This is that Edgefield Clarendon commercial area. This is an area that's zoned NSA and MF2. It's really small. This area up here is in 2 different PDs. And then this is the the Tyler Station development, and then the church right next to it. Paul, I see you got your hand up. I can stop here and take your question. Paul and Yolanda.
Oh, go ahead and let Yolanda go first, because
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
I sort of forgot what I was going to say. I was just curious about, because there's some overlap, right? So there's Edgefield and Clarendon is kind of included in this area because of that 0.5 radius. Is that right?
Correct.
So,
yeah.
I know there are auto shops right there. Is there a similar recommendation, or is that part of was that presented when you talked about Edgefield and Clarendon somewhere else? It's not.
That is actually not something that's oversight on my part. That could be a recommendation. it doesn't have to be. You know, I think that if either you or others have comments on that, I welcome them. But
Yeah. Well, since I was the one that was presenting the concern about them, I mean, I would be representing one of the representatives of this area, just, you know, leave it as it is and have it be a part of the conversation as we go forward. It just stuck out to me that it wasn't in here where it is in all the other ones. And then I know that Wynwood North is outside of our area, but they are within the 0.5-mile radius around Dart Station. Are you going to extend those opportunities for ADUs and expansion of those properties too? Or is that a conversation that they want to have with us as we go forward?
yeah, I mean, that's a good comment. I think that that's something that, you know, there's conversation about accessory dwelling units near transit on a citywide scale, obviously. In terms of specifically for this plan, I don't want to make any recommendations for that area, since we haven't engaged them at all. But as you know, moving forward, if this is an overlay tool or a conservation district would be different. You know, if they're interested in that, absolutely. But I don't want to.
Are they a conservation district?
They're not right now.
I don't
No.
think they are. Yeah.
Hi, Denise is on.
Yeah,
Hey,
I
Denise.
figured she was. Denise from Wynwood North is here, and we could certainly, as a later like when we do our neighborhood meeting, we can
Yeah.
certainly include them in that conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, I would really like that because we as a board have already been discussing conservation type districts, something that would help in the future if needed. So that was something that I was going to bring up to you on a, you know, personally. So I'm kind of glad you brought it up right now.
Okay. Yeah, well, we can definitely work together to have Daniel and his team come out and talk to our neighborhoods.
Okay. And if you want to do that also, like a combo mix or something, you guys know that we're kind of struggling a little bit with the new folks who are coming in. I mean, it's been fast and furious the last couple of years with neighbors moving and new neighbors coming in, and then with, you know, the COVID situation, not being able to meet and get to know each other better. We're kind of at a little bit of a standstill. So I think it would be good if we could, you know, put it together, you know, where we work together a little bit on this. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, some of the is at the implementation phase, and but I definitely, you know, I know we have artificially drawn boundaries, but what happens on one side of the street obviously impacts the other side.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Yolanda, I did want to follow up on something you said, and I know you might not be done, but on that Edgefield Clarendon area, I know you said something about auto shops. The zoning also would allow drive-throughs and gas stations, or are those things that concern you, or do you think the neighborhood would be concerned about, or?
Well, I think that it's something we need to take back to them because, you know, again, our immediate neighborhood association is not necessarily impacted, but that is South Edgefield Neighborhood Association, which is also kind of in a revamping stage. So I think I don't know if anybody's on this call from South Edgefield today. I know Matt's our rep, and then I know sometimes Juan gets on. So, you know, if you'll just give me a minute, I hadn't really even thought about it until I saw the, you know, took a double look
Sure.
at it. I just think we need to just reach out to them one more time, and I can do that this week.
Sure. All right. Paul's got his hand up. I guess that was from earlier. So if you want to go ahead, Paul, unless
Yeah.
Yolanda, you've got more.
Oh, Yolanda, do you have anything else or?
Oh no, that was it.
Okay. So I'm just looking at it because we're basically at the end of the review here. The last things we're going over, Tyler's basically the two stations. There really is only one thing that happens at Hampton, which is the Dart lot, and then, you know, the duplex, kind of what, you know, you went over, Daniel. I look at this and I've heard different arguments about, you know, the don't want anything over 2 stories and density and stuff, but what I've kind of generally heard, at least listening in, is you have like really Elmwood, Polk Vernon, really, saying, hey, we really want to kind of keep our neighborhood character in 2 stories. And then you have some of the ones that have the larger lots, and just South Edgefield in general seems to be more open to the density question. Now, I'm not saying you go build Bishop Arts 2.0, but I mean, when you look at the overall big picture, this whole West Oak Cliff area plan, and then this is the area where theoretically you could make the biggest impact. I mean, we're at the end of the day, as it looks right now, you're not going to really make any major difference that you wouldn't add arguably anywhere. Because Daniel, as you mentioned, the city's looking at doing ADU reform citywide, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's we got to get through short-term rentals first, but it
We-
is a long-term conversation that the city is interested in having.
Yeah, but basically, it wouldn't. ADUs here don't really move the overall scale, especially when you start talking about like the north-south divide, right? If we say, I mean, if you go up the red line, right, and you say what is at each and every station in Dallas or even in the suburbs along the red line, and what type of development they have there, and then you come here. No one's saying you have to be Mockingbird or Lovers or Walnut Hill or so, but I mean that is this is mild. This is what I've heard as well. It's shockingly mild. And what I'm concerned is that, one, this will end up doing some of the very things that you guys have mentioned you're trying to avoid, particularly when it comes to the affordability front. And two, this puts a lot of the load for housing growth on East Oak Cliff, because they have all the remaining stations, and North Oak Cliff, which has the Oak Cliff Gateway zoning. And so if you're trying to if your goal is to concentrate power in the hands of owners over there, yeah, I mean, this will certainly help achieve that. But if you're we're trying to bridge this north-south divide or help with overall affordability or absorb a little bit more of the load, I really, I can't in good conscience just say, okay, this is really going to move the needle that much. I mean, any street in Old East Dallas could theoretically do the same program, this same policy, and it wouldn't be a shocker, transit or not. So that's really it. I would love to hear from like Matthew and some of the other, and just from Elmwood, Poke Vernon, just to get your thoughts on that. But big picture, that's just what sticks out to me.
Yeah, I see Matthew's got his hand up, and then Yolanda. So we'll go in that order.
Hey everybody. Sorry, I've been wrangling a newborn over the last couple of weeks, but I've kind of been hearing the conversation. But yeah, I mean, I generally 100% agree with Paul. I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't take advantage. And I mean, I've got a lot of. I was a part of the early meetings with sorry, with Chad and a lot of the neighbors, and as the few neighbors who were in this particular area, and I'm talking north of the train tracks, and south of Clarendon, because I think north of Clarendon is it's a different feel than south of Clarendon, and south of the train tracks, you've got a lot of, it's definitely a different feel. In this area, South Edgefield is what we're calling it, which is brand new and was formed for the purpose of having a voice in this particular hearing. We haven't really got a chance to form our voice because it's formed for the purpose of chiming in here. And and I think expecting us to have a game plan right now is kind of unfair. But the few of us that are, and I will say every single business owner of Tyler Station, which are a ton of business owners, small business owners, entrepreneurs, people doing really cool stuff. Basically, all of them are residents in the surrounding area, and all of them want something special to be done with this area, high density, you know, I mean, mixed use would be really cool. And I'll say that, like, and I'm not taking shots at any of my neighbors or my home, but like I said before, it's not, there are a lot of manufactured homes that have just been dropped on these big lots and small lots that are just, they're just manufactured homes. And I'm not saying, there's value in really cheap, affordable single family homes, but I really don't think it's the best use for it. And, I'm looking at 4 manufactured homes across the street from me, and, it's an absentee owner, and I don't see anything happening to those 4. There are 4 duplexes on a large lot that I don't see anything happening to them with the current plan going forward. And anyway, I mean, I could say a lot more. Um, you know, Steve, or sorry, not Steve, but the Elmwood Farms. I'm on the board with that nonprofit, and we've just secured a lease for that that about 7.075 acre lot north of Tyler Station, owned by a guy that we all know. And we're gonna hold on to that for 5 years, and we're gonna do a community garden. We're gonna host events and build up the neighborhood, create classes, and do all sorts of things. And we see it as a future for something different. But anyway, I think it's uncharted territory. I think it's unique in that there's a bunch of big lots that are all together, a lot of them vacant. JD, who lives behind me, he owns 4 acres. So, I mean, he's kind of an absentee owner because he lives in Kessler Park and owns these 4 acres. But um, you know, I think we'd be missing out on something special if we don't. I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested in kind of the experts on, like, kind of what, Paul, you would envision more detailed. And yeah, and I'm from what is it, Old East Dallas, and I'm not sure what the analogy was there, but anyway, cool. So yeah, I mean, that's all I got to say. And I mean, I'm happy to try to continue to mobilize a lot of these specific folks. But I mean, again, I'm talking north of the train tracks, south of Clarendon. And I think it's a very, to be honest, like a low income area that has potential to raise the I guess what the word is, like not standard of living, but like dignity of the folks who don't live in the best situation. And I think you can give people a lot of dignity if you give them a different housing opportunity than a manufactured home on a giant lot. Or or I don't know. It's just kind of my thoughts. And like I said, I think I wrote you an email, Daniel. Like, if you spend longer than a 30-second conversation with these owners, they get it. That's like, okay, this isn't the long-term solution for these lots. But single family home. I mean, I think it's going to take a while to see the vision that you guys are putting forth. But anyway, that's a long ramble. Appreciate you guys listening. I'll give y'all an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And I appreciate you bringing up those points. I'll turn it over to Yolanda. And what I also say, just a couple things. One, I do want us to try to get into Hampton Station. I know that these are big conversations, so I don't want us to I don't want to not spend time on them. The second thing I'll say is, we can take a draft to the public that changes based on what we hear from the public. And I just want us to be comfortable doing that. Like, yeah, we want to put our best foot forward, but if we put this forward as our best foot and a ton of people show up and say, no, we hate this, then we need to respond accordingly. And, we're trying to get you, our job as staff is to just take what we hear and try to come up with recommendations that we think work the best, hearing from y'all and from what other people told us in the meetings. So, Yolanda and then Paul.
Okay, well, I'll be brief. I mean, it's not going to be anything I haven't said before. So, but I would say, I appreciate Matt's comments, and our challenge in this area, as I see it, and my neighborhood association is just below where he's talking about. The challenge, obviously, is that this is a largely residential area. It's not like maybe it's not like Hampton or downtown Elmwood. There's not really anything that has historically been, identified, or we don't have any kind of natural sort of commercial areas until you get to Wynwood. And so I think it's hard. And since one of our overriding principles is to maintain residential housing, homes, I think that in that spirit, what you recommend here is meeting that overriding sort of principle. So I would find it really difficult to do anything more than what's been proposed. I know, early on, we talked about maybe Vernon Avenue being an opportunity, and I know that maybe Paul will speak to that, but anywhere else, I mean, it's so heavily residential and it's so surrounded by residential that I think, even if you rezoned the area that he's speaking to, it would just not be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And I think that was a lot of the feedback that we got from neighbors around us. So that's all I will say about that.
Thanks, Yolanda. And Paul, I know you had your hand up too.
Yeah. So, and thank you guys, and thank you both for responding. And I said I can't emphasize enough, Daniel. I feel like you did a really good job with coming up with a solution for missing middle housing. It's just, particularly with Heritage, I have to look at multiple neighborhoods, and it's just almost like a systemic level, if you will. When you look at this, it's the missing middle housing solution came up with makes sense, but a pair of transit stations in an area that has 3 stations and 4 that shared between basically 180,000 people, is not a place that you'd say you worry so much about missing middle. It's one of those. It really does become one of those things when you look at articles about, neighbors are concerned about affordability, and then they'll say, but we're worried about, neighborhood character. And meanwhile, there's no, I mean, in this plan right now, outside of the Hampton station, there really is no route. There's nowhere for you guys to create affordable, reserved affordable units. There's nothing here that's protected. Every single lot here can easily be bought up, easily be redeveloped. You're really just going on the whims of the owner of that day. And there's no easy way to create it because there's no way to create apartments really. There's no good way to create, if you can't, if you're struggling to get over, you can get to 3 stories. That's the kind of stuff where when you talk about, hey, we're lacking, certain opportunities or jobs or grocers, if you can go way out to like, Prosper even and see higher densities than that, you have to ask yourself, is that really the highest and best use? And when it comes to residential, this is a residential. Townhomes are still homes. Apartment homes are still homes. Condos are still homes. They're all still residential. Residential, we really got to make sure we're not discriminating or treating people as other because of the style of residential home they live in. Even if because every single one of these, Elmwood and every single one of these, have gone through cycles of development. They weren't all quite built in one single phase. And many of them have been redeveloped 2 and sometimes 3 times. It's just the nature of a city. But that's really all I can add to that. It's, and you said, in policy wise, it's a great policy. It's just I worry that it's being applied a little too broadly to the wrong spots. But if the neighborhoods feel that that's the best thing for them in the cities and everyone's okay with that, then by all means you got to keep moving forward.
Yeah, If I could just follow up really briefly, I appreciate that, Paul, and I think after having been a part of so many meetings, I think that this recommendation specifically for the Tyler Vernon area really does meet what the requests from the community were. So I support it as it is. And I wanted to go back to what Matt said about, making changes and increasing the dignity of the living for the people that live in those neighborhoods. My fear would be that, or, the expressed concern that we've expressed is that really by rezoning or making the changes that Matt speaks to, it actually would totally change the fabric of that neighborhood. And those people that he's speaking about probably would not continue to live there because they couldn't afford to live there. So I don't know that that's the argument that I don't know how valid that case is.
Hey, let me
So-
just chime in. I think
Sure. Elena had her hand up too,
Okay.
and after you, Elena, you can go.
All right.
No, you can go ahead, Matt. I mean, well, I don't care.
Oh,
who goes
sure.
first, but-
Yeah. Okay. I guess the point of the surrounding neighborhood argument, which I've heard a lot, if you stand south of the, if you stand in Elmwood, if you stand south of the train tracks, and look north, you've got you've got a lot of space, a lot of, you've got a train track, you've got, basically a levee. It's quite a divide, and then you've got, some green space, and you've got Tyler Station to divide and protect these neighborhoods. If you stand north of Clarendon, it's a pretty bustling road. So I mean, I don't really buy that argument of the surrounding neighborhoods are going to be detrimentally impacted by high density. I really don't get that, and I don't agree with that. And I really think that a lot of the surrounding neighborhoods who are chiming in to what these residents, and to what we want is really unfair. And second of all, yeah, to be honest, to be my own developer is empowering, and I think that is, the argument is like, oh, who are you going to sell it to a developer? I'm like, no, I'm gonna be my own developer, and maybe I'm unique in that I have some skill sets where I can do that, but I mean, I don't want to sound, I guess like too insensitive, but a lot of the owners who've owned property in the pathway of development are not complaining that they have been able to probably purchase something way more valuable in the location that they live because of the value of their land has gone up. Like, let's say I develop my home, either I sell it to a developer or I build something my own. I can live in a really, really nice cottage home and have a bunch of savings and whatever, and a lot of these homeowners could do the same thing. And, versus living something that's not, not really as well. And I think it's an unpopular argument to make that to be in the pathway of development is somehow like a negative, or I've got to adhere to the status quo. But I mean, it's an opportunity, and I can benefit. I can live in something that's nicer, that's better, because my land has become more valuable. And I don't, I think, I mean, I think that's the argument, Yolanda, that like, we can get something better than we have.
Well, and in this scenario, though, Daniel, I mean, cottage homes would be allowed, right? Cottage homes,
Right.
family
I was using it as an example of like the higher, like apartments, or like I can move to Elmwood and probably buy a nicer home than I live in right now. Or if I to build a 10-unit apartment complex and sell it.
I mean, I'm sorry to jump in out of turn, but what I'm really struggling with is I'm really getting the sense that South Edgefield because it's a smaller, generally poor, and it also contains the most lots that are easily consolidated to create a lot, significantly more housing. Their opinions, Matt being one of them, but there are others too. I'm worried that their opinions are getting overshadowed by Elmwood and Poke Vernon, which are much larger, much more organized, and I would bet on average are probably on average a higher income. And that's the general vibe I've been getting is this. There's a difference. It's one thing saying, hey, you want to kind of control your general environment, but when you start getting into the point where larger, more organized neighborhoods are enforcing their will on smaller neighborhoods, that's something that I think we've got to figure out and get resolved during the public meetings. Because if you're going to say we're going to go almost directly against what the general policy is, which is, hey, transit-oriented development, north-south divide, bridging the gap, all of that. If you're going to go against all of that, we need to be really sure that South Edgefield is on the same page, and it's not just, Elmwood, Poke Vernon, and some of the other neighborhoods kind of enforcing their will on that neighborhood. And this isn't to point blame at Poke Vernon and Elmwood. It's understandable to try and, hey, you want your neighborhood to have a certain feel. You don't want things next to each other. But it'd be one thing if South Edgefield saying we want to sacrifice ourselves for a lead smelting plant versus South Edgefield saying we would like to have the ability to say if someone wants to buy a single family lot or a larger lot and create 3-story apartments or 3-story townhomes, at that point, that just worries me, especially when you talk about neighborhood autonomy. They have autonomy too. And I want to make sure that South Edgefield is also having their concerns expressed. So maybe Daniel, you might have more information on that, but
well, what I'll say is I think everybody's brought up really good points. I don't think we're gonna hash out consensus tonight. I think what needs to happen is the following. One, I want Elena to be able to speak because she's had her hand up for a long time. And two, I would like to try to have a smaller meeting as soon as we can get one with, and Matthew, you try to pull together some of your neighbors, and then Elena and Yolanda, if y'all want to try to pull together folks, and it can be a Zoom call. I'd actually prefer it to be that way just because of scheduling and everything. I think it'll be easier that way. And let's try to talk through this. And it doesn't mean that we're going to get it absolutely perfect when we go to the public meetings here in a couple of weeks, but we want it to be close. And we want people to be able to react to that. So my proposal would be, let's try to have a separate conversation so we can move to the last batch of recommendations and keep this conversation going. And Paul, you're obviously welcome to, kind of as the UN peacekeeper, you're welcome to be a member of that part of that conversation as well. So
I just have to chime in that Paul definitely has an opinion, so I don't know if he can be the UN.
You're welcome to attend and listen.
That's fine. I can listen. I'm far more concerned about making sure that it's all balanced out. Any outcome you get, and like I said, I'm quite pleased with the strategy. I know the larger systemic issues, but if first and foremost, I'm more concerned about what each individual neighborhood wants.
Yeah, absolutely. Elena, I know you've had your hand up for a long time.
Okay, Elmwood is big, but we are not nearly as monolithic as some people think. Not everybody in Elmwood is completely against any kind of multi-unit and then multifamily, but we're going to have, we're having a meeting with Daniel March 2nd, right? Just to present this and so more people can hear about it. That being said, any neighborhood that says, oh no, we're not having any big apartments, their home values are going to go up. I mean, and so as strongly as I feel that we need to maintain affordable housing, by saying nobody can build multifamily in the neighborhood, that is not going to help increase affordable housing in Elmwood. I mean, I can pretty much say that just looking around. Also, my personal philosophy is one of, if someone owns property, to let them do as much with it that doesn't, it's not just way crazy out there. I myself would like some small apartments, perhaps. And there are other people in my neighborhood who agree. There are other people in my neighborhood that say, no, we need to leave everything the same. And a lot of people that have been residents in Elmwood, particularly for a long time, we want things to stay the same. I mean, we don't want big changes. I also spoke recently to someone who lives across Hampton. I don't even think that the name of the neighborhood is on our area plan. I was looking at it earlier. And she said owns a small tutor, maybe 1,500 square feet. She said, and I told her a little bit, she's Hispanic. She works with me. And she said she didn't want anything to change. And I'm thinking, okay, I can understand that too. So I hear a lot from a lot of different people. By and large, I think that we have got it right as far as maintaining mostly single family, because I think that's what most of the residents want. I also agree, because I'm a strong proponent of public transportation and more green space, that there has got to be a way that we can increase density in these areas close to the train stations. Because otherwise we're not going to become a big city. We're going to be a little weird ass southern thing, that doesn't really know what to do with mass transit. And that's not why I live in Dallas. I kind of like the transit oriented development. I think we should make the plan as liberal as we possibly can. But I agree that we probably all need to get together and chat about it. There was something else I was going to say. Like basically who decides? It should certainly be more than Elmwood and Polk Vernon, just because we're organized. I mean, just because we're organized, that doesn't mean that we should run the show. Although I've found in life in general and through history, the people that are the most organized and the most vocal kind of run the show. That's all I have to say, I think. And since Elmwood intersects both of these both stations, or includes it, I have more to say when we get to the Hampton station thing. But that's, I think, all I had to say right now. I don't know.
I think we also have to remember that the DART was created on an old railroad train. So I think they were, if the idea was to create, dense communities and high density, high traffic transportation, they made a poor choice to begin with, because they ran it right through neighborhoods. So I think we have to respect that, and we have to respect that some stations are going to be lower density than others. Where Mockingbird, it makes sense to have that density. It may not make sense to try to make a square peg fit in a round hole at these two particular stations. And by the way, my neighborhood is only 300 homes. We pale by comparison.
I like to make a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I just want to comment for my area in Jimtown. We are a lot of property owners, very proud property owners. We have elementary schools, middle school in our neighborhood. And so we may not, our values are we're a lot of the families here are generational. They've been here for generations. They just didn't move in Oak Cliff recently. So I just want to set that out, and I too want to balance. We're newly formed, Jimtown Neighborhood Association, and we've grown, and I think we've done a lot for the short time that we've been in existence. We saw the need way before, back when Mr. Griggs was in office. So we saw the need to form the neighborhood association and how important it was way before the task force. But I just want to say that we are proud homeowners. We may not have, there may not be, there's a lot of nice homes here, and people take pride in what we have. So we do have a wealth here, and just want to put that out there that we are proud over here in Jimtown. That's it.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm going to keep us moving to the last batch. And again, I really think that this is a conversation that I want to say needs to move offline, but I think it's a conversation that needs to keep going, and I'd like it to happen as soon as possible. I'll probably follow up in an email. I'll follow up in an email tomorrow anyways, but with specific folks on the task force, I'll follow up, and we can try to set up a time here as soon as possible. Really quickly on these recommendations, none of this is really anything that we haven't talked about. Safe routes to school for Winnetka Elementary, sidewalk and public realm improvements at the Clarendon Edgefield area. Some comments about the NCT COG did a study about around all the DART stations of where improvements were needed. We've gone through all these before. It's sidewalk improvements. I added 2 things in here in conversations with Yolanda. One was improvements at where Tyler becomes Tyler at Vernon. It's kind of a really dangerous intersection. Trying to clean that up a little and make calm traffic and make it safer for pedestrians. And then an opportunity for a pocket park and some green space opportunities on the backside of the Tyler Station property, kind of there by the beer garden and everything. How could that be more of a community asset? And that would require working with private landowner. Okay, so Hampton Station area. I know it's late, and I'll move through this quickly, but I do want us to have a conversation on this. So, general concerns about walkability and mobility along Hampton, desire for traffic calming along Hampton, which is very similar to what we heard further up the street. A desire for more community space or open space, a dislike of existing auto-centric commercial uses, auto-centric being the drive-throughs, the gas stations, all of that. There was a desire for conservation district in Hampton Hills, support for removal of parking at the Hampton DART station for some sort of new development, and general support for up to 4 stories along Hampton in this area. Whenever we did the little sticker survey of how tall people wanted things to be. A desire for new development to have just more walkable amenities, support for single family, accessory dwelling units, neighborhood retail, parks and open space, restaurants, and mixed use, and a desire to not see suburban style commercial uses. So the draft recommendations, and I have some slides on some of these, is similar to the last one, is through either conservation districts or an overlay tool to allow some of those missing middle housing types to be allowed by right, following architectural and urban design standards to be determined on a neighborhood basis. Development would obviously have to follow existing codes for ADUs. The next one's about the Hampton DART station property, and so that's one I've got some slides on. As a part of the city's currently entered into an interlocal agreement with DART to explore. DART is interested in developing that property into some sort of mixed-use development. Their goals being, if they put people living and working at their stations, more people ride their trains. It's more revenue. I mean, That's their interest. And so that's a process that is going to happen regardless of the area plan, because it's DART's private property and they're interested in doing it regardless. The recommendation in when we asked folks in the community of, you know, what they wanted to see on that property was no more than 4 stories, be respectful of the proximity to single family. So think about residential proximity slope, allow for, you know, reduced parking requirements. Because if you see any sort of multifamily near DART, you've got huge empty parking lots that nobody's parking in, because there might be people who live in the apartments there who don't own a car because they live right next to a DART station. Require some active ground uses around Hampton so that we get some retail there. An interest in preserving some percentage of units to be affordable. This would be something that the city in DART would require anyways. The recommendation here is at least 10% of units. I've done a quick calculation of like development on the site. I don't think you'd get more than 100 to 120 units on here, really. So we're talking 10 to 20 units that would be dedicated to be affordable. And then creating some sort of open space on site, and consider provisioning a shared community space, meeting rooms, cultural spaces, or maker spaces and art studios inside the property. I'm going to come back to this just because I want to move through the other couple ones, and then I'll come right back to this. Consider amending the zoning, the rest of the zoning along Hampton Road between Wright and Illinois, which is currently zoned for community retail, to allow for mixed-use development. New zoning should consider a form-based district with walkable urban form, active facades, wide sidewalks. Development should be limited to the existing height of 54 feet. Permitted residential uses should include multifamily and townhomes. So that's very similar to what we're talking about just a little bit further north at Clarendon. So we're really probably talking 3 stories, but just allowing a greater mixture of uses. Consider amending the zoning to prohibit automotive-centric uses such as drive-through restaurants, banks, gas stations, and auto repair in order to facilitate the type of walkable mixed-use development desired by the community. As a way to ensure affordability in the future, can explore inclusion of a mixed income density bonus to allow for additional density. So this would essentially allow developers, if they were interested in developing residential, they could say, I'm going to develop, you know, have a larger lot coverage, or I want a little bit of additional height, but I'm going to set aside a certain percentage of my units to be affordable. And then lastly, parking reductions for commercial, residential, and office uses within a half mile of the station. So going back to the Hampton DART station property. So the property, DART owns everything inside that dashed red line. It's about 11 acres. I looked at a residential proximity slope calculation. If you wanted to build a 50-foot building, so let's call that 4 stories, you'd need at least a current residential proximity slope. You'd need at least 150-foot setback to build that tall. So what that results in is this area that you see in pink. So that's really the only area. That's where the parking lot is today, obviously. So you would have at least 150 feet of distance from any sort of adjacent residential before you could ever build to 4 stories. Spending a little bit more time just looking at the site and understanding the site a little bit, and knowing some of the requirements that, because DART wants to keep their parking, that people still use the park and ride, and they want to maintain that. They just want to develop a lot of the parking that sits empty so much. Spend a little bit more time, again, I'm not an architect, but trying to think about, you know, what development would look like. I think you'd probably see something kind of like this. Generally a 4-story building that would front towards Hampton, and then towards the DART line. And then, you know, a 2-story building on the rear that fronts towards a drive lane. That's the current drive lane that exists today. And then a parking lot where you currently have the parking lot. That's likely, probably some of that's going to remain. And Elena, I see your comment about the light pollution. I think all of these things are things that the plan can and should speak to, is you know, what concerns does the community have that we want DART in their process to address? I've heard concerns about height and, you know, privacy, concerns about light pollution and noise pollution. Those are all things that we've heard. So I just wanted to kind of show what development could look like here. We're not talking, you know, an uptown tower. We're talking a 4-story building. So I'm going to stop there because that was a lot. The only other recommendations are things we've already talked about, which is just has to do with open space and stuff, and you know, community rooms and stuff. And we can go through those, but I'd really like to talk on the land use part first. So I'll pause.
Hey, Daniel, I have a question.
Yeah.
Going back to the DART eagle eye view slide you had there. Yes, there's the one before that. The other one.
Oh,
the first one you showed. There you go, right there.
okay.
Given the proximity there, is that a creek south of the development, or is that residential home?
It's a creek, so DART owns the creek. All
Half
of
the
this is
creek. Half the creek.
okay. They own half the creek. Yeah, I guess the creek is the property line.
Yes.
And then there's kind of this floodplain zone, and then there's a wall between the parking lot and that green space. And our recommendations can obviously say no new development anywhere on the other side of the wall, you know, so that they keep all their development essentially where the parking lot is today.
Well, I was thinking if that's a tall structure, like another drawing said, there may be something considered, maybe that on the southern side of that structure, that there be no transparencies that look out over the residences. But it just depends on what the angles are and where the homes are. Because the rest of the building seems to face Wright Street and Hampton and sort of a broader public space, but there is a little bit of looming toward those southern Elmwood neighbors. So just to be an idea there.
Sure. Yeah. And, you know, the idea with the 2 stories here, and again, this is just my idea, is that would be the same height as a single family home. And you've got about an 18-foot wall there. So I don't think between all the trees that exist and that wall, if you're in that 2-story development right there, you wouldn't even see that from the other side of that wall because the wall's so tall.
Okay.
So I don't have concerns about privacy because you're talking a 200-foot distance and an 18-foot wall in the middle. I just don't think that. I think when you're at 4 stories, yeah, I could understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, and I know that this is just an idea, but you're thinking that 4 stories down there close to where Hampton and Elmwood intersect, right there at the creek. I think that's an issue because, as you know, there are people that live right on the other side of the wall. I mean, I walked it, and
that was my concern too, Ellen.
I looked up out of her backyard and I thought, no, if there's something tall there, they're going to be able to see right there. And she's not the only one. Now it's been those 2 stories that are up to a certain point. That's great, but 4 stories, unless you've got some restriction on windows or balconies, I mean, people are going to be able to look right on her back deck, and I would not like that. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, understood. And again, you know, my concept is just a concept. I should also state that DART has to go through the zoning process on this. So all of this is, I guess, to be frank, DART's going to do this whether we have an area plan or not. The area plan can speak to and should speak to all of the concerns that the community has.
Okay.
So that we can get that to DART versus DART not having any guide that doesn't say anything. And then, you know, a developer could come say, hey, I want to build 8 stories here. And then DART's going to be trying to push for that. You know, so the good news is we can use the area plan to be tactful and helping guide and shape development.
Okay.
And I think that your comments about, either where windows are located, or maybe it's stair steps down here so that it's 2 stories here, and then, 4 stories is
That makes,
located
yeah.
closer to the dart tracks, things like that.
Also, in the chat, I talked about light pollution and creek cleaning responsibilities, because as of right now, I picked up a lot of trash and I put it in a bag that I found on the ground, and this was on Sunday. And the creek is a big mess.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I don't.
It's a big mess now. It has
Yeah.
been.
Yeah, I don't know specifically, I don't know what their agreement is, but I mean, that's something that just generally we can include that,
Okay.
as a good neighbor, that they should be considering that. Yolanda, I see your comment about homes across Wright Street and their considerations of the views. That's a good point. Luckily, none of those homes front Wright Street. They all face the side streets. Or the north-south streets. You know, Again, 150 feet is a really big gap. I mean, that's half a block, and there's a rail line and a 60-foot right of way between there. So, really, the only place on this drawing that you'd have any this is zoned in SA, so it's actually not even residential. So it'd really only be this property fronts out to Hampton and has a building in the way, and then this property is a large lot that fronts out this way. So there's very few property owners on the north side that would be looking at it. But maybe, I don't know if Greg's still on the call. Maybe Greg can speak to that a little bit better.
Yeah, I think, I can't speak for everyone in the neighborhood, but there's a general consensus that if we can get some of the neighborhood services, neighborhood retail and restaurant that a lot of people in these surveys said that they'd like to see come in, the smaller businesses, they're okay with something happening in this parking lot. I mean, it sits empty most of the time, and a lot of these houses, what you can see is the Hampton Station structures. Those are big awnings out there, and most of the time it's empty parking lot. Even Park and Ride. I mean, the lot is not very full. I think
I think those awnings are almost 40 feet. From a perspective, the building wouldn't be a lot taller than the DART station is today.
Yeah. And when the DART station went in, Hampton Hills did go through a lot of negotiating to make sure that really the main concern is make sure traffic's not coming through our neighborhood. And so there are kind of these these mountable curbs at the end of Hollywood and Montreal. It's still going to be the main concern of the neighborhood, I think, and we need to talk to all these folks, but the main concern of the neighborhood is going to be traffic coming through. And so if there's any way to avoid that, then that's what we want. But the Hampton Station structures themselves are enormous right now as it is. And it's there's a lot of sound just from the chimes and the bells and the announcements that happen at Hampton Station. So you've got the noise, you've got the lights, you've got the height already that exists there. If we can go ahead and add some neighborhood services, I think it's a win generally.
I see, Elena, you got the comment about increased traffic around the elementary school. Anything that would come in here would have to have a traffic study done and all of that. I'm not, familiar with the pickup and loading for Maria Moreno and then the school just north of there. All of those things would obviously have to be dealt with and I think we can just kind of leave it at concerns about traffic and traffic flow and proximity to the elementary school. And the onus is on a developer to come come up with a product that meets the community's concerns, and DART's financial goals. It's a challenge, and it's possible that nobody wants to take it on because it seems challenging. That's another possibility of an outcome here too.
I'd like to see it. I mean, I think I think it would be good for the area, and I kind of agree. But we do need to put in the details that are important, which is actual height and what our real concerns are.
And one thing I'll bump forward. So, one thing that, I heard from folks in the community through the meetings was we want community meeting rooms. We want art spaces and things like that. We can work that into the RFP for DART to say, yeah, you want to have some retail spaces, but honestly, a lot of retail is going to kind of struggle here. Can some of that ground level space be dedicated to be community meeting rooms or a rotating art gallery that's curated by the city's Office of Arts and Culture? Or maybe it's retail incubator space for some startup small businesses that want a little 800 square foot space, but they don't have the money to, pay rent somewhere full time, but they just want to have a presence. I think all of those things are things that, could be worked into an agreement here.
There was something else. Oh, are there any plans for any green space or plaza or or public space there? Because that could be very cool.
Yeah, there is. So something that I had here as well is provision for a pocket park or plaza or public open space. Again, that would just be on the developer to come up with what that looks like, where that is. But one thing, if I go back to this, a developer would want to be able to build a little bit taller in Hampton, but they still got residential proximity slope with the elementary school, which is zoned single family. Maybe there's opportunities on that front space to think about, how the frontage along Hampton, because you've got some nice trees there. Maybe there's an opportunity for green space there. I mean, I where it goes, is years away from being determined, but I think having some public open space on site would be a great asset as well.
So it wouldn't hurt to add it, I guess. Well, because I guess we need.
Yeah, I have it on here.
Okay. Yeah,
this top one.
Okay, thank you.
Elena, I think Hampton Station's prime for it, considering the proximity to the creek and the little sliver of lot that goes out over to the east. I mean, there's great opportunity for open space around here.
Yes, but somebody's going to have to keep the trash picked up because right now it's a big mess. I'm just saying.
Absolutely. And that's probably something that I would imagine, because they're going to be doing a ground lease, I would assume, with whoever develops it. If they're trying to lease a property, apartments, they're going to want it to be well maintained too. So, but that's a really good comment. So one thing, that's the end. I wanted to go through these other comments, the other land use comments, and just get any thoughts or feedback before we wrap up. One was about, right now you've got CR zoning along Hampton, amending that in the future to allow for a mix of uses, because right now you can only do retail. And then as part of that, considering known or prohibiting future drive-through restaurants and drive-through banks and gas stations. Just seeing that Hampton right there is already a fairly busy commercial corridor. How do we set it up long-term to serve the neighborhood, also serve the transit station, and generally be a little bit more walkable than it is today? That was the intent for those two recommendations, but I would welcome input on this. Okay, I see that, Elena.
One more thing.
Sure, yeah.
The other thing on one of their limiting drive-through restaurants, banks. We haven't talked about this, but hearing it, I guess from Miss Barbara's comments about predatory businesses. I don't think we want pawn shops or, I mean, on that, specifically that area that's close to the train station, the Hampton Road between Wright and Illinois. Can we add that to this, that second bullet on this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, anything that would happen here would be a future authorized hearing. And so there would obviously be a time for public input on that. But we can absolutely add those kinds of uses.
Yeah.
Paul, I see you have your hand up, but I don't know if it's from a long time ago or not.
Yeah, it's from a long time ago. I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. So the only other recommendations for transportation infrastructure, a safe routes to school plan for the elementary school. We're recommending that for every elementary school, but in these areas, I just wanted to capture those specifically. Sidewalks along Wright Street the entire way, because right now there are no sidewalks in certain stretches. Sidewalk repairs, these are already in the pipeline, but on Hampton from Wright to Illinois, on Illinois between South Franklin and Rugged Drive, and then on Hollywood between Elmwood Boulevard and Illinois. Some improvements at the actual DART station. That's a short-term thing that DART and the city are working on, but just those would be ADA ramp improvements and stuff. And then sidewalk repairs along all of Hampton. That's something we keep hearing. I mean, yeah, I know further north, just north of here, kind of on the Jimtown side, there's a whole stretch that doesn't even have sidewalk. That's a huge priority to get sidewalk on Hampton.
And right, yeah.
Because I mean, how are you supposed to get to the DART station if you don't have a sidewalk to walk there? So. And then we already went through all of these because those are all related to the DART station property specifically. Yeah, Yolanda, good catch on bike lanes. I'll add that in there specifically. That is something that we're recommending, bike lanes on Wright Street, but I'll add it into the recommendations for here and for Tyler Vernon, just so that people see it and it's all in one spot. Any other comments, questions? I know it's been a very long meeting. I think I wore everybody out.
That was fun. I'm gonna go get dinner.
Yeah, I ate beforehand, or else I would be dead right now. I've learned over time, just eat beforehand.
I think we wore ourselves out.
Well, I will say, I know we still have a few loose ends, but in general, we've gotten through everything. So I just want to take a second to congratulate all of us on, I mean, this is a whole lot of content, and trying to synthesize thousands of comments and ideas into actionable items is something that we should all be commended on. And I really just want to thank y'all for all of your hard work on all of this. And, you know, we'll get a draft plan out to the public. And I think, you know, right now I'm just excited to see reactions, because some things are going to be overwhelmingly supported and some things might not be. And that's okay. You know, that's part of the process. So.
Thank you for your patience.
Absolutely.
Everyone stay warm in the next couple of days.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have an ice storm.
It's going to get chilly out there.
Yeah, thank
right,
you.
well,
Thanks, Daniel, too, for explaining everything so well to those of us that had so little experience in this at the beginning. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you all for your patience with me too. So, well, everybody have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Good night.
You too. Good
Good night,
night.
everybody.